I'm Juniper Owens, Director of the Academy of Integrative Mental Health, and also one of the hosts and the creators of our podcast, Integrative Conversations. I wanted to share with you today a conversation that we had with Tammy Berman with My Counseling Connections, who is a relationship expert and also provides collaborative divorce services. And if you'd like to learn more about that, check out this conversation. It's part of our Rewriting Relationships series.
My name is Tammy Berman. I'm a licensed mental health counselor. I'm here in Broward County, Florida. And I've been in practice since about 2003. And I started to specialize in something called collaborative divorce. And kind of the backstory of that whole situation is that every year I would think of different ways to market myself to grow my practice. And so one year I was like, oh, who else would need therapy but people going through divorce and all kinds of like legal issues. So I looked up in the not phone book, but online, and like got all the all the local family law attorneys. And I just started writing letters introducing myself to all the local attorneys. And one attorney months and months later, like 6 months later or something, reached out to me, and she was like, hi, I got your letter. And I was like, wow, like that's really impressive that you're calling me. And to be very honest, I had a phobic kind of traumatic kind of response to dealing with any family law attorney from my own background. So I was like intimidated and nervous talking to her. And she was like, have you ever heard of the collaborative law process? And I was like, no, I've never heard of that. And she proceeded to spend about an hour and a half of her, in my mind, billable time, which you think of a family law attorney, they're billing at $350, $450 an hour time to educate me on the collaborative process. And in that conversation, as well as a child of a really bad divorce in my family experience, which had like lifelong ripple effects, everything that I learned in that conversation about the collaborative law process was like, to me, it was like opening up doors of possibility beyond anything I'd ever heard of or seen before. It really kind of inspired me and excited me. And so as a result of that, she was like, well, maybe you want to speak to like a mental health professional and get their perspective of what collaborative is. And so she hooked me up with somebody local in the community that was doing collaborative. And basically, since that time, I just took more and more steps into basically a deep dive into the collaborative law process, and realized that I needed to become really well educated and specialized in many different facets of divorce, because divorce is like a massive sea that you, when you're in it, you can just get the trajectory, you can get bumped and hit into all different kinds of like nooks and crannies. So over the years, I then got myself certified. I'm a Supreme Court certified family mediator. I became qualified as a parenting coordinator, but I really did a lot of training as a collaborative professional. And at this point in Florida, they have a statewide organization that now gives you a designation as an accredited collaborative professional. So I also have that designation too. And I'm really invested in kind of like educating and teaching people, just helping people realize that there's this process out there that can help save families through a very tumultuous, incredibly emotionally, financially taxing, traumatic time. So that's kind of my backstory. I have other specialties. They don't necessarily, they apply to relationships in many different ways, but so my other specialties, I specialize in working with teenagers. I love working with teens. And I'm highly trained, extensively trained in dialectical behavior therapy. So that's another piece of me. And I need to be a diverse person. Like I just need, I need excitement in my life. And so it's hard to specialize in one thing or another. But yeah, so I found you, like I was curious to talk to you because of what you had to say about relationships and transitioning and just the different facets of relationships. And so I wanted to have a conversation and share with you a little bit about collaborative. as my specialty, because so many people don't really know and understand the intricacy or even that what this is and that it exists.
Yes, that's why I am so excited to be talking with you today, because we are all about going outside of the box of traditional mental health treatment. And we've been noticing there's actually traditional couples and families and marriage approaches that can be really valid and helpful. And also there's so much more out there. And I think as relationships evolve and change and grow, I think we need to as well as practitioners. So I'm really excited to hear about so this collaborative process. So yeah, like what is your elevator speech when you're introducing this idea to your clients?
To my clients, well, I thought you were going to say to my peers.
I know. Well, what do you want? Like what, either which one you pick.
To my peers, I have a shortened version of this backstory that of this year, 2009, when I marketed myself to family attorneys. And this one attorney reached out and talked to me about collaborative. That is the beginning of my elevator speech about collaborative. But to my clients, so my clients, for the most part, come to me already that they know about collaborative. They're seeking more information. It's to new colleagues in the mental health arena as well as in the legal arena now, because I'm very active in statewide and local organizations on educating people about collaborative process. But it's with professionals that are in the field, whether seasoned or not, that are just hearing about collaborative and don't really know about it. And so in that case, I just talk about my personal experience of first learning about it and what it is. So I guess my elevator speech about collaborative would be that, well, now I'm evolving. So I had a conversation yesterday in a committee meeting, and this just came up, and it might pertain to you and more of the kind of conversations you guys have. But I'm sure you talk about the Gottmans a lot. And one of the unique and like key points, pain points or like hooks to couples when you talk about the strategies and the Gottman approach and learning about, resolving conflict, is this big finding in all their research that 75%, like, so they have a massive research, the Gottmans, which is why they do so well in people knowing about them. But in the research, it shows that 75% of all interaction in any relationship, whether a lover relationship, like an intimate partner relationship, or a friendship, 75% of it is comprised of conflict. And so,
wow.
Did you know that?
I was that particular statistic, no, but it makes sense. But it's when you say it, like it hits.
It's conflict based. Yeah. So it's a cool piece. And most people that come in therapy are like, they have that reaction, like, wait a minute, like, oh, like, yeah, that makes sense, right? It's conflict based. And so what I say when I used to do a bit more couples work is, the difference between those people that they call, the Gottmans call the masters, the happy couples versus the disasters, is that it's not about avoiding and not dealing with conflict, not ever learning how to not ever have conflict. It's impossible to not, based on, and the reinforcement of that comment is the research shows, you can't avoid conflict. What they have learned to do is how to manage and approach and deal with conflict well. And the other unique piece of their research finding is that of the 75% of interactions that are conflict based, about 67% of that interaction is gridlocked conflict, which means that there's actually no problem solving or way to resolve it. There's no compromise. And so again, it kind of speaks to the masters versus the disasters, that what the masters have figured out is how to work around and with the conflict. And so this is a long, like, way around to get back to my elevator pitch for collaborative to clients and to professionals, is that it's just a new thought that came up in my conversation yesterday, is that collaborative, so we have for divorce as a process, do it yourself if you can, but most relationships fall apart and don't have good communication. So that's challenging. So that's pro se, do it yourself divorce. Litigation, which most people know, let's lawyer up and go through the system, and I'm going to get you and you're going to get me and I'm going to get what I deserve. And then there's mediation, which is the most well-known alternative dispute resolution process, came out in the 80s, and it's a way to try to work things out outside the court system. However, it's still very much in line with the protocols and thought process of litigation, which is there's a winner and a loser. The attorneys are born and raised in law school to fight and win for their client. But if they fight and win for their client, that means that the opposing counsel is a loser. And when you're talking about relationships in a family, the children don't do well when there's a winner and a loser. They need their parents to both win and be okay. And so there's this new process, collaborative, that is inherently, there's components to the infrastructure of collaborative that are protective of the family unit, and they use what's called interest-based negotiation as their principle. So they have some fundamental principles to the collaborative approach. They're client-centered, they're child-focused, and they use interest-based problem solving and negotiation. And what that is all about is that we help to get mutually satisfying outcomes for the family, that it's not winner takes all, because that's not realistic. And so the collaborative approach, when I think about the Gottmans and how I would tie that in, is this is in principle application, the best possible option we have right now for how to maneuver and manage and approach the conflict in a family, in a couple that's falling apart and wants to reorganize their family. They want to get divorced. They have needs, each of them needs and interests that are in conflict with each other. But how do we do this in a way that preserves everybody? So that's my tie-in now that I'm saying right now in this very moment. Is my first time saying this, but yeah. So that's kind of an example of what an elevator speech would be to talk about with clients, is that that we're talking about interest-based, not positional. So positional bargaining, if you were more of an attorney, they talk about positional bargaining is the approach used in litigation and mediation, which is, I'm going to focus on what my client wants. I'm not considering what to some attorneys may, if they want to, and if they're kind and they try to focus more on settlement, they may consider the opposing counsel's interests to try to get a settlement. But the system, the foundation of law is not set up that way. It's set up to, the culture and the system is set up to have a winner and a loser. And if you guys can't figure it out, the judge will decide for you. And that's horrible too, because you have complete loss of power and you're giving it up to somebody who knows nothing about your life. And depending on how they're doing that day, may have no interest to consider almost any facet of your life. They're just going to use they can only apply the law as well. So yeah, and the other piece about collaborative too, that is wonderful, it's not required by law, but the culture and the movement, the collaborative movement across the world, it's an international movement as well as in the States, and it's very active. Florida's doing really well in terms of our evolution of using collaborative. And the community down here, majority of them at this point, as far as I can tell, and like I said, I'm very connected with a lot of attorneys, they won't do a case without a neutral facilitator. And a neutral facilitator is having a mental health professional that's licensed. We're not doing therapy, but we have the sensitivity, skill set, awareness of the needs, the dynamics of the children, of the family, of the couples, of effective communication, problem solving, conflict resolution. So we use our skill set for the sake of protecting and supporting families and spouses going through a very challenging time. And So that's an inherent component of the process. I say it's not required by law, but most attorneys really don't want to do a case without a facilitator because they recognize the value. And so we work as a team, and it's super cool. I'll tell you, as a therapist, where you're seeing clients and you're one-on-one every day, all day, and it's kind of isolating as a professional. The only way that you get to interact with your colleagues is if you do trainings and podcasts and you interview people and you get active in organizations. But this is just another facet of what we can do as therapists that is way more dynamic and a great feeling, very stimulating, because you're working with other experts as a multidisciplinary team. They need your expertise, you need their, we're working as a team. They have certain capacity and competency to help this family that you don't have, and vice versa. You have certain capacity and competency that they don't have, and we're working to help them with all the needs they're going through. And a divorce, and most attorneys will say this, that a divorce is mostly an emotional process with legal and financial components. But yet the way that historically people approach divorce is that they focus on the law and the finances. And so they think to get those experts in place more than anything else. But meanwhile, emotions can hijack all of that. And so it's just so important to have a guide, a support, a facilitator in place to help you protect the things that are most important to you, your well-being, your kids, their well-being. And yes, your finances need the law, but like, that's not so hard to deal with, to be honest.
That aspect. And I really appreciate that you named a lot as you spoke, but like what really stood out to me near the end was the collaborative process, meaning, and it's right up our alley as with our integrative approach, because like the way I see it, this work is that we have to collaborate. Like humans have taken on, and for understandable reasons, such a reductionistic perspective of like, well, I go to this person for this and this person for this, and oh, I'm getting divorced now, I just have to go to the lawyers. But like what you just mentioned is that we're not isolated and in some kind of vacuum, we're participating in like a system. And so like, I love that this approach takes into like, okay, each role is valuable. And also it's valuable to have this, you called it neutral. Is that what you said?
Facilitator.
Yeah. A neutral facilitator in there, because like, you're right, it is highly emotional. People are getting flooded. I mean, a divorce is happening. There's many, many factors that have gone into that. So we're going to presume or assume that communication is difficult, or that there are some highly emotional subjects that are going to come up. And so to have that support for both, it's not like you're saying, well, I'm just going to be on this person's side or this person's side. You're for the family. And then let me ask you one more question that piqued my curiosity, is that you said interest-based. Yeah. And I would love if you could go into that just a little more. Interest-based versus
positional bargaining.
Yes. Can you go into that just a little?
Yeah. So that's taken from like the legal discipline, the modality. That comes from, I guess, their training and the way they speak about approaching conflict is positional bargaining versus interest-based, because I've never really heard that in all the different trainings I've done in mental health. But it is that it's a way to approach conflict. Is positional bargaining is where you're focused on what you want, and that's about it. And I don't know the scope beyond family law, but it's much more applicable when you can walk away, like we're in business, in corporate law. Positional bargaining is focusing on what you want, and you don't really care how they're doing when you walk away. Like, drop the mic and let the dust settle and like, bye. You know what I mean? That and I don't know all the strategies and tactics and pros and cons of the application of positional, but I understand the effects. And interest-based is different in that when you're focusing on the underlying interests of both parties in conflict, they're both looking at wanting this pie. The pie being the life they had, the house, the children, the assets, the hopes and dreams and what the future was supposed to be and now what it's going to be. Like that's all of the pie, to be honest. There's more I haven't even said of the pie. But and so an interest-based approach, interest-based negotiation is when we're focused on, let's say, one thing, like the house as an example, or time sharing, like what's the best arrangement for time sharing. We use interest-based is all about trying to understand what is most important to each of you regarding that particular thing, all the underlying whys about why you want it this way, what about this is so important to you, why is it so important to you. And the more that we can uncover that and we as therapists, that's what we do when we work one-on-one with a client. I mean, we're all about really getting to the underlying so we can help a client, guide a client based on those things that help them become more congruent with those things that are so important to them. But in the context of a dynamic of a relationship, they both have unique and different interests. Some of them may be shared. And so the way that we approach that, as opposed to positional, it's not about what you want. Positional is about what you want. Interest is about the underlying why do you want it? What about it is important? And the more that we uncover that, the more that we have an opportunity to be creative in how we come up with different options to compromise, to find a resolution that will work for both. And so the simplistic example that's given in the collaborative community, I actually have the YouTube video on my website, is a simple example is the orange. These two kids are fighting over an orange. They want the orange. And mom comes in, or whoever, the adult comes in and is like, what is going on? And they're like scratching, fighting over this one orange that is available. And the adult is like, what's the deal? Why are you fighting over the orange? And Jimmy's like, I want the orange because I'm hungry and I want to eat. And Jane is like, well, I'm making a cake and I need the rind. Okay. And like, this is I don't have any other access to rind. This is the only rind I can get. And so as they discover the underlying reasons why they're fighting over this orange, well, here's just an easy but creative solution to this orange, because you just want the insides. She wants the outsides. Simple. And so they come up with a way to split up this orange. They peel the orange. They give Jimmy the meat of the orange, and they give Jane the rind of the orange. And it's a simplistic example, but it's a great way to illustrate how to be creative about, like, they're just focused on fighting on this thing. But the more that you can uncover all the underlying, and facilitators are great at helping to facilitate that kind of discussion, because attorneys are more like, well, I'd say from training, that there's an evolution of the newbie attorney too. They're becoming more just thoughtful and considered and interest-based in their thought process. But I think, whatever, that's a historical training, situation. But yeah, so that's what we do, is we facilitate these conversations and try to build options, creative options on how to resolve situations between parents and spouses based on their underlying interests. And that's really the essence of what interest-based negotiation is.
Yes, thank you. That sounds familiar a little bit too. Are you aware, have you looked into nonviolent communication? I'm sure you probably have.
So the extent of it for me is I've listened to more books in the last year and a half because of COVID than my entire life. And one of them was the book Nonviolent Communication. That's the extent of it. I listened to this book twice though, because I was like, wow, this was just such a great book.
It sounds like kind of similar to what you're talking about. And I think Marshall Rosenberg is the, one of the discoverers of the nonviolent, but the community has really expanded out to be really accessible. But the meat of it is that you're looking for underlying needs and needs that are not getting met or needing to get met. And that's in Rosenberg's conflict resolution history. And this person was working in war-torn areas, like with the Palestine and Israel conflict, and like, so real serious conflict. And it was like, there's needs. And so you were saying, like, with the interest, what's the underlying like real need? Does the
Yes.
person really need the pool, whatever, or what are they, what's the, is it to be cared for? And then the needs are based on, are very similar to values. So that would be like a value justice. So what if you really value justice, then you might approach this differently than if you value comfort or security, or if things mean a lot more to you. So like, I think that it sounds similar. And my guess is that you'll enjoy reading more about that, and that you'll find you probably are already doing it similarly. Is that, would you agree?
I've like delved into so many amazing books that speak to this whole concept of approaching people at a human heart level, and underlying interests, and it's not just the clients in a collaborative process. This is the unique thing too. Like, this is what I love also about this community, and being a part of it, and what we're learning about each other. It's also what the professionals bring to the table. So like, nonviolent communication is excellent for that. It's been quite a while since I read it, but I also like, so right now I'm listening to Pema Chodron. Well, I just finished that actually, but Pema Chodron has like a series of lectures that I loved, practicing peace in times of war, and start where you are. And she talks about, I just really I don't know, I'm going all over the place in just exploring all that we as human beings bring to the table, when we have a situation at hand that we, some kind of conflict, some kind of dilemma between us that we need to work out. And so nonviolent communication is an excellent one. And there's so many, there's getting to yes. Like, so these are more law books, and there's, oh my God, I could go through my library. I've read so many. There's one I wanted to just mention that is like part of the Harvard Law project, Beyond Reason, Difficult Conversations. And I've also been listening to a lot of stuff on trauma too. There's a new book that trauma, and just understanding how that the effects of trauma, how it changes your behavior, how it changes brain functioning and structure and functioning. So I'm all over the place, but just in the sense of trying to understand people and be of service to help in the midst of huge decisions, and things that are in the way of someone being okay and doing okay. Just to
and it makes sense to be all over the place, because humans are all over the place. We're multifaceted, coming from like, there's so many, the word that I use, my clients are probably like, oh my God, I'm like, what flavor are you experiencing of anxiety? Like we talk about all the distinct aromas and subtle flavors. And like, there's so much nuance to the human experience, and especially relationship, because, you're adding two nuanced, very complex, multifaceted organisms together. I mean, it's a miracle somehow we ever like can get any sentences across to each other anyway, because we're all coming from such different lenses and perspectives. But what I would love, and we're kind of like coming to the end of this particular conversation, but I'd love to hear like a case study or an example of this work that you, what it would look like to go through the process, or maybe an example of one that you thought was like hopeless, and then somehow something, came out of it. Anything that you would like to share that feels comfortable to you about the experience of working in this field?
Well, geez, now I'm all over the place even with that question. Well, let me just share to you what, like, for mental health, for the community that I think we're mostly speaking to, which is the mental health community. One thing I wanted to add, and then I'll also answer that kind of question, which is that there's an evolution in Florida that is much more, has a foothold and much more progressed in California and other parts of the world, Canada too, is the child specialist role as being an integral part of the collaborative process. And so there's a facilitator, but there's also a child specialist that becomes a voice for the children and helps the parents who are going through such a complex reorganization of their life and family to have insight and awareness of the needs of their children from an outside neutral professional that's part of the process. So that's another thing I wanted to share. And what the collaborative process looks like is it's just a couple typically will come either to an attorney and more rarely to in our community to a mental health professional that specialize. Like that's happening more often for me because I'm identified and very like public about who I am. So people come to consult with me about divorce, not knowing which where to go, what to do. And so I talk to them about collaborative. And so sometimes I'll start a case that way. But just to give you a sense of the topography of a collaborative process is that typically it's with clients showing up to attorneys that are collaboratively minded, collaboratively trained, and recognize the value and see the potential for this case, talk about it with the client, get the client to speak to their spouse, get the spouse to consider speaking to other collaboratively trained attorneys. And so they start to begin and germinate a collaborative process. They identify, so it starts to get going. They then identify a financial professional they want to use and a mental health facilitator they want to use, and sometimes maybe a child specialist, but usually it's a facilitator that might bring that person on. Anyway, so then they reach out and we mobilize the team. So first the team needs to confer with each other and make sure we're all on board and we're all good and all documents are good before we disseminate them to the clients. We then disseminate them to the clients and we begin an onboarding process. So everybody does their own individual intakes offline and we prepare for this process. And the process, the way it looks, is a series of team meetings that are typically about 2 hours that we schedule them for the clients and a half an hour pre-brief and post debrief for the professionals so that we're always like, it's kind of like a comprehensive treatment team. Don't you wish that we had this as like an inherent, like great option in mental health, like that you had your primary therapist, but you also had a couples therapist, you had a trauma therapist, like that we were working.
Yes.
Would that not be the coolest thing ever?
That would be the coolest.
and the same in the medical field. I wish like this model of a multidisciplinary team to me is like the future. And I want to see that everywhere, to be very honest. I see that as like being way more efficient, holistic, addressing all the needs. Just like you were saying, we've become this reductionistic, like you go to this person for this and this person for that. But imagine if they all work together as a team, knowing, like all talking and having their different input and perspective. Anyway, sorry, I digress. But anyway, so yes, it is costly. It could be. But anyway, so the topography of a collaborative process, the big humps are the series of team meetings. And at that team meeting, it's very structured and organized. We create an agenda. We have very specific limited things we address at every meeting. So we're not overloading the clients. There's things to learn that the clients need to learn and be educated and be well informed to make good decisions. And so each meeting is set up for the sake of having transparent information gathered and explained and discussed, question and answers, and for the clients to give their input and negotiate and or like discuss decisions based on options that we present to them of all the information and how to resolve the conflict. And so it's a series of team meetings like that. And then little things will happen offline in between those meetings that might need to happen. Like, you know, what's a typical thing that happens offline in a process with children is that the facilitator does the parenting plan with the parents offline. So we have our own separate meeting offline or series of meetings where we're working out the parenting plan. And any big issues or big questions that we can't resolve, we bring into a team meeting. And so it's set on one of the agenda items for a team meeting. So that's kind of like the topography of what a process looks like. We may need to bring out outside professionals for a moment here or there to give expert information that the team that's in place doesn't know, like like a financial planner for a spouse that doesn't have a good sense of, like, never dealt with finances. And so like they need specialized education, but also the other spouse needs to hear a little bit of what the information is being gathered and how the financial planner is helping, or that financial planner is a resource to that spouse in the midst of this financial discussion, so that this spouse can always refer if they need to, like they have the access right then and there in the context of this team meeting where we're talking about finances. So yeah, so that's the topography. And a case, I can tell you one of the very first cases I was ever paid on, as just a very quick anecdote. This was spouses that, upon the second meeting, the mom realized that she could not comfortably afford to live in Broward County with what the finances were going to look like. And not to mention, she had family in Texas, and so there was a support system in place for her kids and the family. And she wanted to move to Texas for that sake, like to be able to afford a cost of living and have resources and support to the kids, because now their family was splitting into two and there's no real family local. The husband was like open-minded to that, but we needed to gather information and educate him and explore things on his behalf to figure out how he could do that to support the needs and interests of the wife. This became a relocation case, and to mental health people who don't do divorces day in, day out in terms of the legal logistics, this might not sound like a big deal, but the attorneys on the case were floored at how we completed this case in 5 meetings, and it was over the series of like 3.5, 4 months of a full divorce, with a parenting plan in place, with a moving plan in place for both spouses. So this became a relocation to another state case that we got done not only in 5 meetings, but over the course of 3.5, 4 months. That would never in a million years be possible in mediation or litigation. It was an amazing experience. And I also have to say that one of the professionals was I don't know that she was even properly trained as a collaborative professional. The husband's attorney was well trained, and she mentored the wife's attorney on how to do collaborative and like the benefit of collaborative. And so she was on board, and we gave it our best shot. And I'm telling you, at the end of the case, this attorney who does litigation and is part of such conflict all the time and hates the system and is overwhelmed and everything, at the end of that meeting, our last meeting where everything was concluded, this was her. You guys won't be able to see this, but I'm just going to describe what I'm doing. This attorney leaned back, put her hands behind her head, and like looked up at the sky, and she was like, the face on her, she was in so much happiness, and like it was like she was high. And she was like, this was amazing. She's like, and I can't even believe I'm billing for this, because it was such a different experience for her, for being part of a solution, being part of like helping people, and that it was so easy. It wasn't so conflict based with every step of the way and all these little cogs in the wheel every step of the way. And that's I guess that's the best anecdote I can give you, like a brief synopsis of, I'm not going into details of the mental health. It would be hard for me to remember and give you like details of that, but yeah,
that's a great example. Yeah, that's a great example. I really appreciate that. And like, it's a great example of like, it's not just, the experience isn't just with the family and the spouses, but like also the attorneys and everyone involved seemed like, and think about it, if you're feeling better about your work, and we say this a lot for mental health professionals, like that's why we believe that, personal and professional development is equally as important, because if you're feeling really good about your work, it's going to come out, and the people that you're serving are going to feel that. So yeah, I really appreciate that example.
Yeah. So if you want to learn more about the collaborative process, so I belong to a local practice group. I am actually the incoming president this year. I just got nominated in. It's called the Collaborative Family Law Professionals of South Florida. And you're welcome to always come as a guest, but I would love for you to reach out to me through my website. Check out, I have all the different services that I offer through there. So my website is www.mycounselingconnections with an S at the end.com. And you can learn a lot about the collaborative process, about dialectical behavior therapy, and all the different services we offer through there. And feel free to schedule a consult. I mean, I'm really happy to educate, mentor anybody that's been interested in collaborative, has clients that are contemplating divorce. I'm highly invested in educating them on all the process options available to them, because I'm telling you that our community and nationwide, the community does not yet know and educate, legal community does not educate their clients about this process, the collaborative law process. So I'd be happy to offer a complimentary consultation. My number is 954-477-7455. And yeah, so that's it.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your passion, and your experience with working with relationships in this way. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.